Welcome to Fiction and Focus, a podcast where we explore the craft of writing without taking ourselves too seriously. I'm Nathan Harms.
And I'm Wesley Watts. Each episode, we'll discuss uplifting topics like the soul-crushing pressure of expectations, the suffocating grip of self-doubt, and the swift kick in the unmentionables of rejection.
We'll share our experiences, struggles, and heartaches in the hope that you might find some small measure of comfort in our collective misery, or at least have a laugh at our expense.
So grab a pen, paper, and your favorite writing snack, and join us as we put fiction in focus. All right, welcome word nerds. That's our catchphrase, right?
Yeah, sure, for now, until we change it.
Did you even say it last time? I don't know.
I did.
Okay. So we are back with part 2 of our writing advice that we hate. And looks like you're wearing the same thing you did last week.
I know, you too.
Huh.
Weird. It's almost
All
like
right.
No time has passed.
Almost.
What have you been up to this last week since we last did a podcast?
I went to the bathroom.
I got water. Wow. It's been an eventful week, man. Let me tell you.
Where did you have to go for that water?
3.5 days in one direction, 3.5 days back. Oh. So it's kind of funny. I was thinking like that. The first one, it's writing advice we hate, but you know, we agreed on a lot of it. And I think what we're finding out, and we'll see if this continues the trend with the list, is that it's not so much that we hate this advice, it's how the advice is implemented, at what point it's implemented, and so on. So a lot of it really comes down to the tone of it and when you're implementing said advice. So it's not that it's necessarily all been bad advice. It's just been, you know, advice that could kind of get decoded wrong.
Right. It's situational. And when people make these lists and put them up online or whatever, or famous authors, that's the worst, put it out as like this universal truth without the nuance or the caveats or, you know, it's good in this circumstance. That's when it becomes problematic.
Absolutely. It's not a one size fits all thing, any of this, and it's all subjective, it's all situational. So yeah, just keep that in mind as we continue on. Let's see what is next on our list here.
I think it was my number 3.
It is. It's your number 3.
Is funny because this goes against everything that we just said, because this one I do think is pretty much just bad advice, just plain bad advice.
It is. That was kind of my lead up into this. Everything thus far until this moment.
So you were teeing me up. Okay, I got it.
A little bit. Just
all right.
Just a touch.
Well, we weren't supposed to say that because that's like giving away the secret sauce. So the bad advice, and this is actually on pretty much everybody's bad advice list, which I'm happy to see because I want less people thinking this is a good idea. It's usually said one of two ways. It's write what you know, or alternatively, don't write what you don't know. Yeah. I think that kind of goes, it doesn't need much explanation. It's saying write from personal experience and don't write things that you don't know about. Yeah. It's, wow, what do I even say about this? I should have prepared because
it's right there.
There's
not much to it. I mean, see, I'm confused though. I thought you had gone to space and, you know, I thought you had the personality of Malcolm in the Middle and had created an uprising. That's not personal experience?
Oh yeah, it was totally personal experience. Yeah, like Gabby, the main character in Me and the Machine. Yeah. Might as well plug this book in every episode, right?
What's it called again?
Me and the Machine.
One more time. Just kidding.
But yeah, Gabby is many things that I am not. Mm-hmm. I have never been a 17-year-old girl, believe it or not.
Really?
Really.
I'm shocked by this.
Yeah. Before my head injury, I was pretty good at math, but I was never a math genius. Nothing of the sort. I've also never been a lesbian.
I have. I'm
Yeah.
just kidding.
Oh. uh, so if you were to stick to this advice, most people would have like one novel in them. Most
Yeah,
people that wanted to write, they'd have like one novel in them, maybe a short story,
yeah,
and that's all they're ever going to write.
100%.
Um, and we would have no science fiction. We would have definitely no fantasy. Most of the horror, definitely all the paranormal horror stuff would be out the window. The billionaire romance genre, which has become a real thing, if that was going to be look like people's real experience, whoa, would that be a different kind of thing?
There'd be court filings on that.
That would be
So
real uncomfortable to read. Yeah, it's just bad advice, and I think that
it is.
it goes against
I'm.
what.
You can
Sorry,
take
go
it.
ahead.
Sorry. No, you go.
No,
You go.
I
You're
was just going to
too
say it
polite.
goes against what we should be as authors. So what we should be
100%.
as authors is showing empathy for other people,
Mm-hmm.
putting ourselves in their shoes, and
Yep.
trying to write from very different characters than us, and do our very best to get it right.
Yeah. So I'll be the devil's advocate here just a little bit. I will say I think there's the only exception to this rule. It's not even really an exception. It's just as if you're dealing with sensitive material or things with like racial undertone, trauma, abuse, that kind of thing. Just be careful with it. Treat it with the respect it deserves. Do the research. Do your interviews. Do the work, because nothing is worse than reading something from someone who doesn't know what they're writing about, and did not take the time to research it. It'd be like if someone was like, in Topeka, California, in the year 1492 when the first jet was invented. Um, there's some factual errors there that you might have wanted to do some research.
Right.
So that's the only thing I can say is like it's not about writing what you know, right? But it's about if you don't know it, you can learn it. That's the thing with writers. I think I've often joked that if I think you've made this joke too, is if the FBI could see a writer's Google list, they would put them on like the 10 most wanted because it just
Right.
random stuff.
Body.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Ideas of how to make a bomb, and not because you're doing it, but because your character's doing it. What temperature does bone melt? I don't know, just whatever. It's a interesting thing, but it is just bad advice. If you don't know about something but you want to write about it, learn about it, and just be really careful when it comes to quote unquote sensitive topics, because
Right.
you don't want to be that guy that disrespects like the past. That's one of my favorite genres is like revisionist history. For people that don't know, a good example, like mainstream, like a media example, would be like Inglorious Bastards or something like that from like Quentin Tarantino, where you're taking something that happened in history and rewriting how it's ending. It's really fun to write in that, and I've done some exercises in that and delved a little bit into that in one of my books. But you have to be careful with it because you don't want to also disrespect the past, right? That's like that tricky thing in there where you can basically do anything you want, but you don't want to be like, I don't know. You can do whatever you want. Just be aware. You might turn off some readers with that kind of stuff, but again, I think it just comes through research and learning and doing all that stuff and wanting to learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, write whatever you want.
Well,
Write whoever you want.
I will say this. Yeah. So if you are touching on a sensitive topic like you're talking about, if you are going there are ways to do it. Research, sensitivity writers, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Before you get that far, you probably should kind of have a moment, take a beat, and think to yourself, am I the right person to write this book?
Right.
So you're not going to see me as a cis white male write about American slavery,
Right.
from a slave's perspective. That's not
Right.
going to happen. I could do my best. I could research it. I could try to imagine what that was like.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe I would do okay, but there's just no world where I'm the best person to write that story in.
No.
You know,
I would say you have to be passionate about it. There would have to be a reason for it.
right.
Within your
Now,
story,
now I could write about a slave character in a fantasy world
Right.
or some science fiction world and take some of that same research and still try to put myself in those shoes. But then if I'm getting some of those details off, some of those very important details,
Right.
it doesn't matter as much because it is fantasy.
Yeah.
Um, maybe I shouldn't say it doesn't matter as much, but I'm not telling somebody else's story.
Yeah. I think that's why unless so here's the example of when you wouldn't want when you would want to take this advice is if you were like actually writing like historic like nonfiction.
Yeah.
Right. That would be the only time where I would say that's great advice is like if you're writing nonfiction. But yeah, if you're writing any kind of fiction, I think you can write whatever you want and just be careful about what you write. So I wrote a story called "I Was a Forest" that's about a woman who's dealing with trauma, and it's because I had someone close to me in my life who was dealing with something like that, and I found inspiration through our conversations and felt like it was a story that I wanted to tell. And as a straight white male, you know, it's almost kind of become a selling point on the book where I'm like, I didn't just write the book, I did the work.
Right.
I really did look into it because I didn't want to be preachy or anything like that, and it wasn't meant to be. In fact, it was basically telling a story about how people grieve in different ways and that there's no right or wrong way to accept a tragedy or to accept trauma.
Yeah.
And that was basically the point of the book. But that was one of the hardest books I ever wrote simply because I had to keep stopping and starting again because it would take me into a weird mindset. So I mean, I will tell you that if you go down the road of writing something you really don't know, you're probably going to have to do a lot of research and you're going to have to pull yourself out of your own head more often than not just to stay sane. But
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, if it's in just a general thing, it's like, I mean, let's be honest here. If we followed this rule, the entire world would be about overweight, middle aged white men. Like that would be majority of the books out there. Because I'm just gonna tell you, I'm just gonna tell you from all the conventions I go to, majority of the writers out there, and we'll have to talk about this on a future episode. A majority of them look like us. It's a big percentage of especially self-published and especially in like the sci-fi and fantasy genre.
Yeah.
Now, not saying there's not plenty of writers out there that don't look like us by any means, but let's just be honest. If we weren't all trying to write other worlds besides the one we live in, or other skins besides the one that we wear, God, it'd just be boring books, very boring books.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that I loved about the own voices movement that was coming out of traditional publishing, and still is, I believe. I haven't really kept up with it, but for the last several years, own voices was a big thing.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening that doesn't know what that is, in case you don't know, it's just the traditional publishers and agents and everything that like that were looking for, specifically seeking out books written by the people that should be writing them, kind of like the example that I just gave that I would not write.
Right.
So in that way, it was pushing write what you know to an extent,
Yeah.
but in kind of the best possible way of trying to, bring in other types of people that were not well represented in publishing. So from that perspective, I think that's amazing, finding the right people to tell those stories. But I just feel like the advice is just so limiting, and I don't think it should be some kind of rule. And
absolutely,
just a stupid idea.
Well, I think especially because I think the rule isn't even for the right purposes. It's not like it's like admirable cause of inclusion and giving people a voice that they haven't had in the industry before. The whole point of that rule is to try to push people out of the way if you're an expert at something, so you can have the steady lane
Yeah.
in that. So it's just selfish advice. It's I would say that advice is probably only given from people that have like one novel under their belt and they spent like 10 years on it.
Oh.
And they're very, it's like about their childhood growing up or something, and it's, they're
Who,
very bitter or something.
I actually know who coined it, who first said it. The name is escaping me. He wrote Huckleberry Finn.
Oh, yep.
Fuck.
Wow. Writing guys.
Yeah.
Don't know who Mark Twain. Mark
Mark
Twain.
Twain. Yeah, Mark
Yeah.
Twain is the one that came up with that.
Mark Twain's an asshole. No, I'm just kidding.
He
And
might
what's
have
he
been.
gonna
I
do?
don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know much about him, but yeah, he. As far as I know, he's the one that first said that.
Right.
And I don't know what he had in mind with that. Maybe there was some nuance that he was actually trying to discuss.
I
but
think
again, that
so. I think that was probably before there was like a really big subgenre of like
definitely
sci-fi and the great American story was really the only stories being told. I think in a lot of cases at that time. Granted, there's still like fairy tales and stuff like that, but I think that was the popular thing that was being written back in those days, was like, very true stories that were like those American classics and so on. But the
I
truth
got
of the
one
matter
name
is,
for you,
oh yeah,
Jules Verne.
there we go. See, and it's interesting. It's just like, yeah, it doesn't really work at any point in time. We've always loved lore and like fantasy and
I know
stuff
where
like
you're
that.
going, though. I know where
Right.
you're going, and I thought it was a good thought, but it's
I I just think at that time, at that moment, maybe that was the more popular of the genres.
probably, but it's a very myopic view.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, for sure. It's just bad advice. We're
yeah.
gonna chalk that up to, we're gonna agree that is bad advice.
Yep, universally.
Universally bad advice. Okay, so I guess I'll go to my next one, which is don't use adverbs. It's not a big one, but I get the idea of this. By the way, is that you want to sound confident in the things you say, but I also think if you're writing, depending on like the genre you're writing in, and if especially if it's in like the mystery genre or something, I think dropping adverbs before within sentences versus being like cut and clear in your voice is a good thing and can actually build tension. But that's just my opinion. What do you think?
I think the advice is coming from a good place, so I think that is
Right.
because again, I'm looking at most of these pieces of advice as being they are geared towards aspiring writers, newer writers, people that are not super confident in their craft yet. Because
Right.
once somebody is super confident in their craft and is successful, they're not really looking for advice from others.
Right.
So for a newbie, the idea to limit their adverbs, because newer writers often do kind of really rely on them and overuse them.
Right.
I think the advice is coming from a good place.
Right.
But again, it's too on the nose. It's not nuanced enough, and it's too the way it's worded is problematic. I would just say that.
Yeah.
Maybe the better way to say it would be try to limit your use of adverbs.
Right. Like, and I get the idea of just like, I almost ate the peach pie. No, you ate the peach pie. But like I get the idea that if you're trying, you don't have to build tension on everything. You don't have to be subjective within your point of view on everything. But I agree with you. I think it's I do think it's a bad writing habit that too many writers rely on, especially newer writers. Usually I go through and I after when I'm doing my final edit, I usually cut about half of them at that point, because I go, do I really need
right?
it's sprinkled throughout, and you'll find some that you're just like, no, that's totally not needed. But there's some sentences that I can't talk, um, where I'm like, I can't imagine that phrase without an adverb in there. So,
I actually have a list of about, I don't know, 30 or maybe 40 words
hmm,
that after I've got a draft completed, and I go through the editing phase, I control find and I look for those one at a time.
that's awesome.
And, some of them are adverbs, some of them are not.
Right. Overused words that
They're
you
just
use.
overused words, and they're filler words that you can often take out of a sentence that
Right.
and not change the meaning. And that's
Yeah.
the exact criteria I use for adverbs. If I can remove the adverb from a sentence
Right.
and it doesn't change the meaning, it doesn't change the tone, then it didn't
Yeah.
belong there. But I'm not going to worry about that while I'm writing. That's an editing thing.
Right.
And sometimes the adverbs work great.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's the perfect word to use.
Yeah.
So sometimes you need to modify a verb, and that's what the adverb is there for.
Yeah. It's funny. Our first Zed and Zia book, my word was truly. I used the word truly way too many times in that book. It was truly this. And my brother read it and he's like, do a search on that. And I used it like, I don't know, like 47 times or something in the first book. It was some crazy number. And he's like, do we need to change the title like Zed and Z and the search for truly, so that was like but that was a great piece of advice where I was like, yeah, I'm like relying on this word.
Yeah,
And it goes beyond adverbs. I think just using certain words as crutches, I think that is good advice. Like, don't do that. But again, I think, like you said, it's too general of advice, and usually when it's given to people, it's given in a general sense.
yeah,
Because I think they just assume you're probably going to be an egregious violator of said act.
yeah.
So,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
and going back, I think I talked about him in the last episode. Guy Gabriel Kay, my favorite fantasy author of all time. I bet if you gave that manuscript to one of these people that espouses that advice and said, if I gave them Tigana as a manuscript and they don't know where it's from or who wrote it
right,
or anything like
right,
that, they would red pen the shit out of all the adverbs and be like, this is trash, and be like, well, that book won some awards,
right,
sold a whole lot of copies. It's pretty amazing.
right.
Not that something's selling well means that it's good, but
Yeah, no, no, no. And again, these are all subjective
they
things,
are.
and I think every single bits of advice are in their own merit good pieces of advice if told to a certain person at a certain time in their career under the right circumstances.
Yeah.
It just is when you do a one size fits all, it becomes bad advice because if everybody took all these different pieces of advice, whether in part one or part two, it would really limit the kind of books that were out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool.
So you're up next with
All right.
your final one. I like this one. This is a really good one. I don't know that I have strong opinions on it, but I have some opinions on this.
This one is all about nuance.
Right.
And I've heard this one so many times, and I kind of wonder, if one of our 5 listeners is gonna, hit the keyboard and comment on it and let us know how wrong we are, which would
Please
be
do.
awesome.
Yeah.
So the advice is read voraciously in your genre,
Yeah.
which there's an adverb in there. Hey. Um,
Bringing it back.
so I absolutely do think an author should read voraciously.
Yeah.
That part of the advice, wholeheartedly, 100% agree with.
Yeah.
The part I don't necessarily agree with is in your genre. And
Right.
I often hear this advice coupled with some nuance, which is nice that the advice is not coming on its own. But I often see this as like the advice added on to with, well, you need to understand the tropes of your genre. You need to understand the expectations of your genre, reader expectations, I mean,
Right.
so that you can give the readers what they want. I strongly disagree with that added piece of advice.
Yeah.
And going back to the just in your genre, I just think you should read generally a lot.
Yeah.
Um, my favorite genre to write is science fiction. I've read plenty of science fiction. It's actually not my favorite genre to read, though.
Yeah.
I read more fantasy and I read, more contemporary fiction.
Yeah.
And I pull things from those other genres and contemporary fiction
Yeah.
into the way I write. So moving on from that, basically, yeah, I don't think the genre expectations and knowing your tropes are necessarily very important. Outside of maybe a few genres, it seems to be tropes seem to be very important in the romance genres, both general romance and subgenres.
Right.
And those tropes sell books. So, in
Right.
those circumstances, you should probably know your tropes if you're trying to sell large amounts of books, at least. But maybe you're not. Maybe you're trying to write something avant garde in the romance genre. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, I've been rambling. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. I think so for me, I actually hate to read in genres that I write in. Not because I don't read those books, but because for me it's kind of like a vacation when I'm
Yeah.
reading something else. So I actually like a lot of philosophy books, self help, like stuff like that. Actually, is what I enjoy reading. So it's kind of a weird thing. Like I write in fiction, but I actually enjoy a lot of really weird subgenres that I would never write in because I just don't want to because it's just not my interest. But I love reading them. And so, yeah, I've read my fair share of fiction, but I find that my go to, if I look on my bedstand, it's not, or at my nightstand, it's not a lot of stuff that's in my genre. I think the one exception right now is I'm reading like the collected works of H.P. Lovecraft, and it's just like this massive, massive thing. And I kind of fall into that genre a little bit, but even then, I was more just interested in reading his books in or his writings in order from when he
Okay.
didn't know what he was doing to like later on in his life. So for me, that was more like just an experience. But I also think if you read too much in your genre, even with tropes and stuff like that, it affects your writing in a very negative way because you start to subconsciously almost steal from what you're reading.
So yeah, I actually have something to add to that. I purposely, although like I said, I've read plenty of science fiction. I'll continue to read science fiction, but when I'm writing science fiction, I do not read science fiction
Smart.
because I will absolutely steal the shit out of whatever I'm reading,
Yep.
totally by accident.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the first thing I read after I was done with Me and the Machine was this self-published book called Partition by Kevin Kane.
Okay.
Um, really well done. Really, it was long as shit.
Yeah.
He probably could edit it down a bit, but it was fantastic. And the idea behind it was very cool. So, just to go on a quick tangent, every person basically on the planet, just like we all have iPhones and or smartphones now, has gotten this partition where they have an AI in their head,
Mm.
and basically half the day is yours,
Yeah.
and then half the day is the AI's. So you only live half your life, but the AI does everything for you. It goes to work for you, so it makes all your money. It cleans your house, grabs your groceries, all of that stuff. So all of a sudden, we're in this weird time frame for humanity where everything, like all people have, is leisure time.
Right.
But at that, like I think it was 8 o'clock at night. Once 8 o'clock hits, you're gone.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the premise, and then it's like this murder mystery
Right.
where basically one of the AIs kills somebody, and won't give too much away, but it was very very cool. Some of those ideas were a little bit similar to what I was doing with Me and the Machine
Right.
with the AI. if I had been reading that simultaneously, I totally would have copped some of Kevin's ideas.
Right.
And I actually emailed him after, like when I was done reading, I was like, I told him, I was like, hey, great book, man. I'm so glad that I wasn't reading this when I wrote, because I would have stolen your shit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done it on purpose, but I
Oh, yeah.
can't help it. So I have a rule about that. And then when I'm writing fantasy, I don't read fantasy.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like if you're writing a song or something, there's only 12 notes you can play in any order, right? Like at
Yeah.
some point, you're going to play every combination of everything has been done. Nothing is original. There is someone that almost word for word has probably written a book that I've written somewhere long ago that never got released or something. I don't know, but like there's similarities everywhere. And I think the the less you can have what you're currently working on inspired by something that's in the same genre, um, the better it is. It's good writing practices to take yourself out of that. Now, I think you actually get more from story structure, which we talked about in our first episode. Go listen to it now. I think you actually get more helpful advice from really learning about story structure than reading voraciously in whatever genre you're writing in a weird way, because that's really what's going to help drive your story forward. And anytime I've read something that's a little bit different within the subgenre or even within that genre, that's usually the things that I like the most. It's cool when you can't quite put it in the genre where you're like, it's kind of horror,
Yeah.
it's kind of fantasy. Those are my favorite books, actually. And when I meet authors and they're like, this is high fantasy with da 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 da, and they give me the whole rundown and like mumbled elevator pitch that we discussed in last week's episode, go listen now. Those are usually the books I don't like because they are almost a word for word copy of any book in that genre. They've too much encompassed themselves with this is easy now. They can just sit down and write a 700-page book, and release it because they've read so much high fantasy, and now they're just changing names almost. The stakes are the same, stuff like that. I'm not saying everybody does that by any means.
That's what ChatGPT does.
I mean, there's some legitimacy to that,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get into. That's an episode I'm really looking forward to, is talking about AI and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
I've found within using AI as a tool to look for like plot holes and stuff like that is that it just repeats itself consistently. You know, if it's like try rewriting it like this, I'm never gonna do that because it's just gonna have the same exact metaphor every time. It was a chill down his spine, and then there was a chill down his spine, and then the chill came down his spine. It doesn't know enough, and it's just borrowing from other places. So like having those original ideas is so important, regardless of what kind of writer you're doing, what length of book you're doing, what format, what story structure. Not encompassing yourself within your own genre that you're trying to write in, letting that push you in a direction is that's it's a good call. It's a good call. It's bad advice. That's very bad advice. Not saying you can't know about your genre, especially if you like it, but especially while writing
a little bit.
Yeah, right. Like I thought fantasy was something else.
Like I don't want people to take that and not that anybody's listening to us really, and gonna be like, oh, he's Wesley said that, so I'm never gonna read in my genre. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think people should, read a fair amount in their genre at least.
Yeah.
Probably read a lot in your genre, but also read a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
And unless you're intentionally focusing on tropes, don't worry about them.
Right.
So, that pretty much sums up my view.
Yeah, no, it's good. So the last one we're going to talk about for episode 3 for us.
Tell us.
Is I'm not going to tell you.
Tell us what it is.
No, I'm going to show you. Thanks for the tee up there, buddy. It's show don't tell. Now, I will say this. This is actually really sound advice. In general, there is definitely a sense of when you're writing to show, not tell. But my exception to this, and why I don't think it's bad advice. It's just it's usually advice that I hate hearing, only because usually it's if you're doing it the other way around, there's a reason for it. It's very intentional. In my book that I just came out with, Pollyanna and the Eternum, I sent it to Wesley to check out. And I believe the first chapter, that was actually one of your comments that you had made to me at first was, I was going to say show don't tell because there's a lot of telling going on in this, but then I saw what you were going for. And whether that's just because we're friends and he was making me feel better about it, I don't know. But it was solid advice in the sense of like it was intentional. Like I knew how I was setting it up. I was setting it up like almost a narrative to start the story that was very based on like the humble narrator discussing.
Right.
And that's kind of the tone of the book has that anyway. But I think this is like everything we've talked about. There's a time and a place for everything, and nothing should just be a static rule. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are this one is the closest thing that we've had on this list for the entire 2 episodes that is just good advice.
Yeah.
But again, closest. That doesn't mean I actually think it's good advice.
Right.
It needs to be specific to the scene, not even
Right.
just the writer, not even just
Yeah.
the story, but literally down to the scene that you're talking about. If you're
Yeah.
giving somebody advice just in general, show don't tell, or you're receiving advice just general, show don't tell, it's awful. It means nothing because
Right.
you have to do both.
Yeah.
There's no way not to do both.
Yeah.
And there are instances where you do want to tell. You absolutely like want to make a conscious decision to tell something because you can get through it much faster.
Oh yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
in fact, I think I've got off the top of my head kind of an example of that. Like, so if you were writing a character that is getting up in the morning, getting ready for work,
Yeah.
so you can just say that. You can just
Yep.
say, John got up, got ready for work, got out the door.
Yep.
Or you can show that and talk about him eating his cornflakes, brushing his
Right.
teeth, putting his boxers on, all of those things. That is going to be boring as shit.
It's the car ride theory.
Yeah.
It's you never want to show the car ride unless something's actually happening in it.
Not unless you're talking about a Royale with cheese.
Right.
But you can also take an example of when you might want to show something like that.
Yeah.
You could have John get up, brush his teeth 42 times each way.
Right.
You could have him measure out 3/4 of a cup of cornflakes and half a cup of milk. And you could have him flip each light switch 3 times, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And now you are telling us about the character and using that scene for the character. That's going to maybe still not be the most interesting thing, at least in that example, but at least you're using that for something.
It serves a purpose within the story. At that point, you start wondering about the character, if they're what kind of obsessive compulsive disorder maybe they suffer from, or you can see the character in your head at that point. And yeah, absolutely, that's really cool. That's awesome character building. Or like, obviously, like if you're writing like a action scene, right, you're gonna you want to show as much as humanly possible. I've also found that if you're doing exposition, which God, we're gonna have to have an episode on soon, this exposition, because I found sometimes the easiest way to do exposition is to do the tell don't show, in the sense of like, you just get through the nitty gritty. You say, this is what it was, this is where it is, onward with the story, and you just move on. Because otherwise, if you have a whole like 3 chapters devoted to world building, it might sound really, really cool, but no one's gonna care if you're just doing it so you adhere to that rule.
Yeah. I got in an
sometimes.
argument online recently about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the username? Let me look him up.
I don't remember, and the post got deleted after it
Oh,
turned
that's
into a big
awesome.
thing. Um,
That what's a really good kind of a good place to end this episode on too is I would like to hear about some interactions you've had with any of these bad advices, and I'll some vice versa. But like, where's some of the places you've heard these from, and when have they maybe rang true or not rang true, depending on who the voice of reason is? I guess
oh
would be
wow.
my question. Is that a
Um,
lot? Let me
well,
put you on the spot.
that's a cool question. It is a bit on the spot. Obviously, we're not going to go through every one of these, right? You
Right,
just probably
right.
want like one.
Yeah, just one or two examples. Just whatever you got.
So, just in general, because I try not to interact with people.
Right. God, why would you want to?
Right.
Makes
That's
sense.
that's why that's why I'm an author. Now, most of the stuff happens online, though.
Yeah.
Facebook groups, or before that, like I was on like Writer's Rule and Lit Reactor and those old school websites where writers would go to, you know, critique each other's work and talk shop and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah, I'd hear most of that stuff there. Like you put up a chapter for critique, and somebody's main advice is, "Oh, show don't tell."
Yeah.
Thanks, dude. About what? That was a whole chapter.
Right. Right.
Like,
Give me something more than.
yeah.
Yeah.
Back then, it was probably advice that I did need, but I needed a little more specific. But
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Oh, let's see. I'm gonna go back to write what you know and don't write what you don't know on this.
Yeah.
Because this is one I actually want to have a full episode on.
Yeah.
But I would actually we would discuss this, but I'll go ahead and say it publicly. We want to have someone on that does have the viewpoint that men probably shouldn't write women, at least most of the time, because that is a very common online thing. Men writing women badly, basically, and
Right.
kind of people saying that men shouldn't write women. Most of my characters' viewpoint that I write from points of view are women.
Yeah.
Say probably 2/3.
Right.
So I've been told that a lot.
Right.
And basically, when I was done with Me and the Machine, or mostly done with Me and the Machine, like I didn't have a final draft, but I was close. One of the things that I did to try to circumvent that was I went to Fiverr, and some people might think this was a bad idea, but I went to Fiverr looking for beta readers, and you can pay beta readers there pretty low dollar amounts, and they'll read your book and give you feedback on it.
That's cool.
And a lot of people would probably say, well, they're terrible or whatever. Like, I've heard a lot of shit being talked about any services on Fiverr, but the ones that I found, most of them were actually really good.
Yeah.
And really affordable. So what I was able to do, because they were affordable, is I got 5 beta readers to read my book. And really, at this point, I was only looking for one thing, because it wasn't a final draft yet. All I was looking for is, could they tell anything about the author? So I made a fake account. It was under another pen name, another pseudonym that had no. It was just initials.
Yeah. So no gender association.
No gender association.
Okay.
And I told them nothing about myself. After they read it, you give them a little questionnaire for a beta reader about how the story was.
Yeah.
I think I gave them 4 or 5 questions, but really I was just looking for one.
Yeah.
And this one question was, please guess the age, gender, and sexual orientation of the author. And none of them were anywhere close.
That's awesome.
Like none of them said man.
Yeah.
I think one said they couldn't tell and preferred not to answer because they had no idea. But I think the other 4 guessed woman with a wide range of ages, and most said probably bisexual or gay.
Right.
So that let me know I was on the right track.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
So that's kind of what I did for sensitivity readers without saying they were sensitivity readers.
Yeah, no, that's such an important thing, and I would really, I would, and not in the abrasive way or anything. I would really love to get a guest on the show who has an alternate viewpoint, and my guess is we'd probably end up agreeing on a lot of things,
Right.
as far as it comes down to the substance of how you write it. But at the same time, we really don't just want straight white males only writing straight white males in their books. Like it just becomes stupid at that. Like why are we at that point? That's the opposite of inclusion. For being fearful of
Right.
inclusion. Like it's a weird thing, right? So, yeah, no, that's those are two really good examples. I guess for me, I mean, one I already went over, which is like the wrong way to do an elevator pitch, right? Which is just go to any convention, walk by any author, and just start looking at their book and see what kind of elevator pitch they give you. Are they going to give you the, like we were saying, the right way to do it, the one sentence, here, check out the book? Or are they going to mumble through some pre rehearsed speech about what it's about and just dull your mind? I see
Real
it
quick,
so much. Yeah.
all of that was in our last episode. So if you haven't listened,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Go
go back
back.
and listen. Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. That was last week.
It was last week. Even though we didn't change clothes.
That's right. Um, so I think the other one though is going to kind of come down to format, which we covered in. Was that last week's episode as well?
That was last week. That was how we ended last week's episode.
Okay, that's out. Go listen now. Um, I had an online experience with that where I was on this writer group on Facebook, and this person had posted. They're like, "Hey, I'm thinking of writing a book." And I was thinking about doing it this way and that way, and it was, I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was something that was a little bit anti-genre. Like it was something that you normally wouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the comments just lit up with all these professional writers who were just flaming this person, basically saying, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that." And to the point where one of them says, it'll just make you look like an amateur and that you don't know what you're doing, which is, I'm guessing, not far from the truth. It was some really just
Ooh.
vicious. And so, me being me, I'm like, okay, let's check this person out. And so I kind of did a little Sherlock Holmes, and they had never published a book. They had just posted on
But
there
giving the advice, right?
giving the advice. They'd never published a book, self published or otherwise, and all their posts on there were essentially just giving updates on their novel that they'd been working on for like 7 years or something like that, and just. And I found that my voice is this, and da 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 da. And if you would like to know how, it was this
Yeah.
really weird, pretentious. And so I commented back, and I was just like, advice like this is what stops people from wanting to become writers. Try it. If it doesn't work, rewrite it. I don't see why you wouldn't just try it. And so my big thing with advice is writers in general, authors in general, the whole community. There is a lot of really good people out there. And I'm going to say it's a very supportive community compared to other communities that I've been parts of. For instance, the music community
Right.
is a lot more cutthroat, a lot bigger personalities.
We didn't make a whole lot of friends there.
No, we did not.
We met
Or
each
money.
other, but that was it.
So true. We lost friends there. No, I'm just kidding. Just saying. But the writers community is really, really good. But there are those few people in it that are just, there's no other way to say it. They're pretentious, know-it-all assholes. And no matter how successful they seem, when you meet them and they sell themselves to you as a new author, as knowing all the answers and having the keys to the castle, my biggest piece of advice that I will give to you that is good advice is don't listen to those guys. Not that they don't have some nuggets in there, but in general, those aren't the people you want to be listening to. It's going to be the people who have a smile on their face, who are anxious to talk to you, they're proud of their work, they're excited to be there. Those are the people you want to learn from and talk to. People who have a bunch of books and have been doing this a long time and you can tell they're just having fun being there, talking to people and so on, and they love signing a book. Every book they sign means something to them. Those are the people you want to get your advice from, because clearly they found joy in the process, and they're not pretentious assholes. So,
well said.
Yeah. Is that the cut for the Facebook trailer?
Talking about pretentious assholes?
That's it. Title of this episode. Well, yeah, so I guess join us next week for, we're not sure what yet, but we're going to figure it out.
Well,
we will be wearing different clothes next week, though.
We will, and we are looking at, I don't know if it'll be next week, but we are looking at having a guest on, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So.
We're looking into a couple of guests. If you are listening to this podcast right now and you would like to be considered to be a guest on this podcast, please reach out to us, comment, like, subscribe, ring that bell, send us a message, depending on what format you're on. If you're an author or someone in the industry and you just like to chat, we can send you a questionnaire and go from there. Wesley, if people want to check out your book, where would they go?
I just recommend Amazon.
Awesome.
So just search for Wesley Watts, Me and the Machine, and that's the only book I've got under this pen name right now. And have a look, see if it's up your alley. How about you?
Yeah, visit harmspublications.com, and you can get to our Amazon store from there and see all of the books that I've been a part of. So until next time, thank you all for joining, and we will see you on the other side.
Thanks for listening.